disenfranchised, and they had really, they were like political orphans of some sort. And so when the deputy president comes with the hustler narrative, he's able to appeal to that group that is feeling left out, because it looked like, look, we had tear gas, we ran in the streets, we were downtrodden, look at us, and then now you guys, when you sit down, you have a cup of tea, you agree, where does that leave us? And so I think the deputy president pulled a genius move in finding a way of galvanizing that support and sort of drawing it to his side. But if we look at it critically, a hustler is not just a person who's downtrodden. There are some people who started out as hustlers and are now multi-millionaires, multi-billionaires. In fact, that hustler nation is led by some people who are self-made millionaires, others who have had long stellar careers and are, by definition, no longer really hustlers, if we look at that definition as the downtrodden of society or the people in the lower cadre. So there are some pretty high-class hustlers on that bandwagon. So I think maybe the conversation right now should be, is there a way, like I said before, is there a way that the economy can ensure everybody gets some prosperity? Because if that is not the case, then the traction that you're seeing with the hustler nation can only get stronger. You have to understand that there's some people who, for them, the point is, I have tried and tried and tried to make it in life and have not succeeded. You know what? It must be because somebody else has, amekanyagia mahali uko juu. That's why it's not trickling down to me. If that conversation is going to be unpacked, then prosperity has to be felt by all. So I think part of what the Jubilee government has failed to do is communicate to the people on not just how they're supposed to benefit from when they look at these big projects, they're seeing the big roads being done and the big dams and the other big things. How does that trickle down to joy? What does that mean for the bottom line? That's what Mwananchi sometimes feels left out. And so when they're told, you know what, there is an alternative hustler nation, it appeals to them because they're like, you know what, in this other Kenya, we are being told there is growth in GDP, there is this, but I'm not feeling it. So you know what, maybe that's the other place I belong to.
Okay.
But if we've learned anything from looking at the United States in the last few months, that conversation can morph into a monster very easily. So it's one of those things where, as a nation, we need to weigh our priorities and our options. Is this where we are headed? And if that's where we are headed, are we really managing the situation such that we are not feeding a monster that will become too big for us to handle, that it becomes an all-out class war? But right now in Kenya, I think it's a situation of people finding where they belong, because people want to belong. And right now, Hustler Nation is giving quite a lot of people a place to belong.
Mark, over the weekend, the Deputy President spoke about the fact that he will not speak about communities, getting into leadership, but he will speak about every hustle. Dr. Ruto has indeed made this hustler narrative quite popular. He's brought it to the fore. What was the reaction when he just put it out there that the fact is he's not going to speak about this rotational presidency thing that you're speaking to, but he will address and will speak to the issue of every Kenyan and every hustle?
You know, let me start by deconstructing this narrative. Let's start here. The full name of the narrative is Hustler versus Dynasty. It's an us versus them narrative. And it's a dangerous narrative when you say that the reason I am poor is because Jeff Mote is rich. It's a dangerous narrative. It may seem quite okay and dandy now, because for us, dynasty for us just means Raila and Uhuru. But when you look at it and you take the microscope to it, then the only person you can say has inherited a position from his father, and that's not true because his father died many years ago, is Uhuru. Raila, by definition of a dynasty, does not qualify. His father was only vice president, and if we were to go by that extension, then even Ruto's children are dynasties. Kibaki's children are dynasties. Everyone who's had a position in this country is a dynasty. But every time such a narrative has been brought to the fore, whether it is by Hugo Chavez in Venezuela or by Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany, the results is always the same. It becomes a class war, because the person who's looking at me on TV or looking at Joy with her leather seat, to him, if he's poorer than us, assumes that we are dynasty. So that's danger number one. Number two, if you're really about the people, then let us look at it this way. Is Mama Mboga the candidate for any of those seats in Matungu or for Nairobi governor? No, they're not. If you're really about the hustler, let's look at Margaret Wanjiru and what she did with the housing plan for resettling people from Kibera. How many houses does she allegedly possess? So you cannot be about hustlers and bringing equality when the truth of the matter is that what you practice is still elite politics. This is a false narrative. It's giving false hope to people, and the real problem with Kenya has never been that I am poor because someone else is rich. That is a very, very dangerous thing to say, because what happens is you impassion the hearts of the people, and then you've got to look at any place, whether it is Zimbabwe, Venezuela in recent history, who propagated this idea that because there is a white farmer somewhere, if we kick him out, we will be wealthy. All of those economies have fallen to pieces. So I'm not quite sure where we are going with this hustler narrative. What are we going to do? Are we going to grab the lands of the rich and give them to the poor? And if so, how many acres of land has William Ruto himself given to these so-called hustlers, if it's really about them having the access to capital and resources? So this is, again, a question where we've got to ask William Ruto. You have been in parliament since the 90s. You've been a minister, you've been a deputy president, and in the first term of the Uhuru Ruto presidency, you were almost co-president. You almost had the same powers. Which hustler paradigms have you put in place? Even when he says that when we talk about changing the constitution, let the hustler be front, right, and center, what suggestions does he have? But is it just the donation of wheelbarrows and donations of cash to church? Is that how we help hustlers? Absolutely not. We had 24 years of Moi doing exactly that, and we went exactly nowhere as a country. You do not develop by donations. So let us stop pretending that because a lot of people feel a certain way, then it's a practical way to do things. We are here given the job of analyzing what needs to happen in this country with science and history as backing. So I'll tell you how you fix a country such as Kenya. Number one, you create a free trade agreement with Africa, and this has come into play already. What does that mean? It means that there's a free movement of labor and goods across the continent, which means that people who are as unskilled as maybe a casual laborer, a mason, can go work in Tanzania where there are few and make money. It means that if you're a manufacturer and the Kenyan market was too tight for you, you can now go to Uganda, you can go to Central African Republic. That is how you fix a country. You fix a country by doing a deal with Britain before Brexit and making sure that trade between Kenya and Britain is not disrupted. You come up with policies that actually begin to affect the ground, begin to affect the mwananchi, and then you look at the real numbers. Ask the question, how many Kenyans have been lifted from poverty from 2013 to 2020? And if you look at those numbers, then you understand the government is doing something. This hustler narrative, number one, not only is it empty of any economic policy at all, and I dare them to show me any from any economic school, including not just Harvard, but also give me one from Karumaindo University that tells me about how hustler and versus dynasty has ever built any economy across the world. Then secondly, it is empty of any real policy and steps to be taken. Okay, how are we going to make Mama Mboga an MCA? These are the questions. If they were answering those questions, I will give them the time of day. But I'm telling my Kenyans, hustler versus dynasty, us versus them, has killed 40 million people in China, killed hundreds of thousands in Venezuela through hunger and the bullet, has created such devastation in Zimbabwe. I visited Zimbabwe, I have seen it. I have seen chaos in South Africa. I'm telling you, it sounds good, but trust me, those are the sounds of war.
Joy, even as we speak to what could be the hustler versus dynasties narrative that's taking place, for those who have been accused of being dynasties, they're not speaking to the issues as well. They're trying to explain how their fathers weren't in the dynasty. We had former PM Raila Odinga speaking to the fact that his father was a hustler. Uhuru Kenyatta's father was also a hustler. How do we move that from talking about the fact that we are not something to speaking to the real issue, which is inequality? How do even those who have been accused of being in the dynasty speak to the issue of inequality? Because that really is the elephant in the room, as everybody tries to claim that they are not part of a dynasty. They're also trying to make things work and hustle. How do we speak to this inequality divide and bridge this gap in opportunities and wealth?
One of the things that I think the hustler narrative is failing in, and I think I pointed this out earlier, is that even the ones who are leading the hustler narrative are themselves not poor Kenyans. They have made it in life to some degree, and maybe better than other Kenyans. But I think the point that then needs to come across is that the narrative, therefore, is not being peddled in terms of rich people versus poor people. It's being peddled in terms of, I can feel and I can relate with where you come from. I remember where I come from, versus those who wale wameacha umaskini na kona saba, so to speak. So that is where this game is being played. So somebody is telling you, look, I may be wealthy now, but I remember what it feels like to sleep hungry. I remember what it feels like to not have some. And I think that emotional connection is what the Hustler Nation has been very effective in doing, is in latching into that feeling of despondency. And then in this corona year, that has not been very hard to do, because if you look all around you, there's a lot of people who are feeling down in the dumps. And so for somebody to identify with them there is actually a big deal. And that's why I'm saying Deputy William Ruto is reaping the whirlwind of what used to be Honorable Raila's mainstay. He was able to galvanize people and give them hope of a better tomorrow. Now, with the handshake, there's some people who are feeling like, you know what, there's a vacuum here. And so DP Ruto has slid in and has sort of offered that alternative conversation. Now, moving forward, there's one thing that we need to understand. For many Kenyans, they know there will never be this political leader. There will never be this rich and that. What people just want is a fighting chance. And I think that's why I said earlier, we need to start having a conversation, showing people how some of this macro economics that we have will eventually translate into a better prosperity for you. So like Mark pointed out, if you are talking about a free Africa trade agreement, I need to understand as a person in Juakali, how then can I get my sufurias that I'm making here into a market, for example, in Ethiopia? Or let's say if somebody wants to go and try his hand at something in another country, because this is in the African continent. We've had xenophobia, we had other things. So how has the government overcome that? Even from just Tanzania here, there's a time Kenyans were being expelled. So when you talk about free trade agreement, a Kenyan will tell you, but I used to work in TZ and I was kicked out. So how does this get me back into what I was doing in TZ? The conversation has to be broken down to that level, because unless we find a way of helping the common Mwananchi understand what government is actually doing for them, then the accusation of government is doing nothing becomes louder. So for example, if you look at BBI and what Honorable Kang'ata was talking about, the biggest failure is in failing to get civic education, to get the people to understand what really this means for them in black and white. To take away from, it's not just the constitutional question, there's the other parts of the document. These conversations are not being had. So when Kenyans come back and lash back at you and tell you, you know what, then this thing is bad, you don't want it, you can't blame them, because they're only working with that which they know. So I think there is a failure in that connection. There is a breakdown in that communication. But that said, there's one thing we need to also understand. For many people, they don't dream big. They just want to be able to take their kids to school. They want to be able to have healthcare when they need it. They want to be able to put food on the table. When we come to a place where there is a health worker strike and that needs resolving, the children are going back to school and things in school are still not quite right. The conversation needs to be had at that level, because if they don't see how it affects them right here, then those who are peddling a conversation of a better tomorrow, they get, because I'm a person of religion. I know I am a Christian and I'm born again because I'm hoping to go to heaven one day. Maybe if there was no threat of hell and no threat of and no promise of heaven, maybe I might not have been a believer. That's not to say that this is what it's all about, but sometimes all you need to sell people is hope. And I think that's what the Hustler Nation has been able to do, is to sell hope. But you've asked a very important question. Some of the people who are being accused of being dynasty were not always dynasty. Their parents were also hustlers. Again, that's the conversation people need to have. So if you know the way of getting out of hustlership into a place where you're no longer a hustler, can you help us see the way there? Okay. Because sometimes I think the conversation has been had in a level that people have not really the fact that I can be a hustler today, but tomorrow I can be something else. And I think that's the conversation that Honorable Deputy President is having with the people and is resonating with them, because he's telling them, you know what, every hustle wins, every hustle matters, every hustle, and that is offering people hope that they're not getting somewhere else. So, like I said, that communication has to be revamped, because people need to make the correlation between what government is doing and how it affects me down here.
We have some feedback coming in. Once again, you can get me on Twitter at I am Jeff Mote. Paul Jenga says, the problem with our nation is not even presidency. The biggest problem is lack of good governance. If principles of good governance were well implemented, we wouldn't have had people talking about this tribe has led us for long, and it's now time for another tribe to lead. We also have Njeri. The problem is that Kenyans still think of an economy in the micro sense, me, myself, and I. And we'll vote on who will have the most impact on their microeconomy. Macroeconomics is foreign to most. Another one coming in, Bithi Munyui. Kenya is run in a more skewed capitalistic economy than a mixed economy. On matters politics, people still vote on ethnic blocks. Devolved governments have brought a lot of red tape and bureaucracies in carrying out business at the mashinani level. Keep them coming in, of course. Get me at I am Jeff Mote or at K24 TV. We have around 4 minutes as we wind this up. Mark, let me come to you on this, because even as the BBI process gets to what essentially is a home stretch as it approaches a referendum, clearly this hustlernomics, this hustler narrative is muddying the waters for this particular process. Do you think this will actually sway how people view whatever will come forth at the referendum when they're going to the polls to vote yes or no?
Let me just address something, that this hustler versus dynasty narrative needs to be broken down a bit further. What kind of hustler are we talking about? Are we saying Sonko is a hustler and that's how Kenyans should hustle? Should Kenyans follow the Waititu route and what he did to that poor widow? Should people follow the post-election case of Mzee? And is that the route by which we are saying that we should hustle to make it? You know, let me tell you, there's so many dangers. You know, if you look at some people, you know, I even shudder to say, if you go back and read the newspapers about factual stories about the Mutamas of this world, the Margaret Wanjirus of this world, is that really what I want to tell my kids? That, you know what, this is how you hustle and get to the top? Really? Is that how we are going to coalesce as a people? We are going to coalesce around Sonkoism and Waitituism? That's what we want our children to coalesce around? I am worried, because I would rather even my children coalesce around being Embu, Kikuyu, Meru, because at least huko kwetu in my village we've got morals, we've got standards. We don't body shame women. We don't take videos of us with women and share them on social media. We've got some morals, we've got some standards. This is, my friend, life is not just about I made money. It is also about how I made it. It is also about what kind of man I am. It is also about, do women feel safe around me? It is also about, can people call me without me recording them? You know, come on, as in this is something to be said about the morality of this country. There's something to be said about our hearts and minds as a people. There's something to be said that giving tithe in church is not atonement enough for mistreating people. There's something to be said about that. And for me, my worry is we are trading so-called economic prosperity, and it's not even real. It is a mirage. And we are saying, you know what, because we are hustlers, let's embrace every kind of hustler there is, whether they be prison prefects or not. Let's embrace them and put them together in this pot. And that's the Kenya we want? Really? I'm very concerned. I'm very worried. But to your question, the truth of the matter is this, that Kenya is a developing nation. It has been a developing nation since its founding. Kenya is one of those countries who in the last decade has moved from 44 billion economy to $100 billion economy. Kenya is doing some things right. But Kenya is also developing in a space where we need to realize when we used to set up a factory such as Rivertex in 1970 and in 1980, it had 3,000 employees. But the technology of today means it needs 300 employees. So we are facing a phenomenon across the world called jobless growth. Now, how do you address that? It is the same issue that Bernie Sanders is grappling with. It's the same issue that countries that have developed and are considered now to be top economies like India are grappling with. Because India, you'll see a Ferrari parked right next to a slum. Now, how do we fix that issue? Now you need to go back and look at what the government is also doing. This is why we have cash transfers to the elderly. This is why we have sunscreen to our albino brothers and sisters. This is why we are spending a lot of time creating issues such as universal healthcare. This is why we want universal transition, because what do? You need to lessen the burden on the poor. But also remember, we are a third world country. We do not collect enough taxes. So we cannot afford to do what the United States is doing in terms of sending $2,000, that's 200,000+ shillings to every Kenyan. But are we on the right trajectory? I can tell you that we are 80% on the right trajectory in terms of economic changes that are needed to actually and practically help Kenyans. Wheelbarrows and coalescing around wheelbarrows is not going to develop Kenya. And that's not a political statement. It is a statement of fact.
Okay, Mark. And I think at that particular point, we'll have to draw the curtains on this particular conversation. Of course, as always, it continues online. You can still get me at I am Jeff Mote or at K24 TV. But many thanks for being on the show and making time to be part of this conversation via video link. Mark Bichachi, communication strategist, thank you so much for your time. And Joe Mdivo as well, the Executive Director at the East Africa Center for Law and Justice. Many thanks for making time and your contribution on the show. Take a short break at this point. We are back at the top of the hour as we get interactive. Don't go too far.